Welcome back. The Guantanamo detention center was considered one of the most controversial aspects of the Bush administration's so-called war on terror, but now President Obama finds himself dealing with claims of torture at Bagram, the large U.S. military prison in Afghanistan that continues to expand as Guantanamo winds down. Discussing the issues involved, I'm joined by Andy Worthington, an expert on the legal issues and personal histories of the detainees at Guantanamo Bay. He's joining us from London. And here in Washington, D.C. is David Rivkin, an attorney and expert in constitutional and international law. Andy, if I could get back to you and ask how reassured are you, considering the issues, the concerns you've raised, how reassured are you at the Obama administration's efforts to try to change the detainee review process and perhaps weed out those who might not or should not perhaps be in the detention center?
Well, you know, I mean, fundamentally, I have just a problem with the whole definition, really, and it comes back to what my colleague was saying before the break when he was discussing enemy combatants, and I don't think there is such a thing. This was a category of prisoner that was invented by the Bush administration. It's the one that I hoped we would see the end of. When you're detaining people in wartime, you hold them as prisoners of war according to the Geneva Conventions. The other people that we're talking about, so the foreign prisoners rendered into Bagram, and the kind of people that my colleague was talking about, and I completely understand that absolutely no way do you want soldiers in wartime to be thinking that they've got to read people their rights when they're capturing prisoners in wartime. But this other group of people, these are criminals. These are not the warriors. So on the one hand, you have battle, where you're capturing prisoners of war and treating them in accordance with the Geneva Conventions. And on the other hand, the dangerous people that I think that we're both looking at here, for me, these are people who should be criminal suspects. So that once you've captured somebody and you understand that this is what you're looking at, that they're involved in criminal activities, not in warfare, they're involved in terrorism, which is a crime, then that's the point at which you try and get these people into the US judicial system to face trials. So, you know, to me, that's the mess that we're in, really, is that President Obama has said that now there are going to be Guantanamo-style reviews of the prisoners who are held at Bagram, who are not held as prisoners according to the Geneva Conventions. And if they were, they would be screened on capture. Very important, the Article 5 competent tribunals, which America basically pioneered from Vietnam onwards. That when you capture people out of uniform and you're not sure whether they might be a farmer or a taxi driver or a soldier because of the fog of war, you hold a tribunal, they can call witnesses soon after the time of capture to weed out the soldiers from the innocent people. In the first Gulf War, there were about 1,200 of these held, and 900 of the people were released. Now, this has never taken place, and it's not being put forward by Obama for his new proposal. He's proposing holding on to people and then sometime afterwards giving them some kind of review process. This isn't going to alleviate the problems that the Afghan people have with not understanding what kind of random detention system is in operation. Because I think the key to it is that they want to hold prisoners to milk them for their intelligence value before they start sorting out these kind of tricky problems. And, you know, knowing the history of what happened over the last 8 years, Bagram, I'm sure, is nothing like it was in the early days with all the abuse that you spoke about. But when you're focusing on intelligence rather than keeping people off the battlefield, I think the temptation to get into an abusive situation where you don't think people are cooperating is a bit of a difficult thing, really, and we shouldn't be going there.
Let me put a question that came in from a viewer, if I may, to you, David, by the name of Vicky Nikolaidis, who wrote in through Facebook saying, Bagram prison must be closed. The detainees must all be given lawyers, and the judicial system of Afghanistan must process the detainees legally. All detention centers in Afghanistan and Iraq must be reviewed for legal processes. Is the Afghan judicial system even up to handling that kind of responsibility?
Well, it's not, and remember, both situations improved in Iraq, not so much in Afghanistan. They're both countries plagued by very difficult insurgencies with thousands and thousands of civilians dying. I would say several things. I think Andy and I said from fundamentally different propositions. This is war. It's an irregular war. It's unlawful warfare. It's not something that's been invented in the last administration. That type of war goes back to the very dawn of modern age of international law. Italian city-states circa 1400s, the notion of irregular non-state entities fighting unlawfully against the established state authorities. Nothing new about it. Happened to us before. Unless we treat it as something other than a criminal law phenomenon, we're going to lose, and not just us, but our allies. And in general, we have to be reasonable. We have to remember, but it's not only the equity involved here is the equity of a due process of a detainees. What about the equities of civilians who are being killed and maimed by this type of regular warfare? Unless we're able to come up with a system that allows a reasonable basis for detaining people who are captured in the process of this combat, we're not going to win. So we cannot just, and if you start treating it as, incidentally, we have no ability to discharge the obligations in the rigorous habeas system. If you try to process them for American criminal justice system, none of them would be convicted for the same reason, because we don't have sufficient forensic and other evidence. So let's be honest. And if you want to put them for the criminal justice system, all of them would be let go. I think it would be a bad result.
Let's get Mohammed on the line from DC. He's been waiting patiently with a question or a comment. Mohammed, thanks for your patience. What would you like to ask?
Yes, for Mr. Revkin, if we turn the tables around and if you or I are traveling overseas and we get arrested and we were tortured like these people are being tortured, whether in Morocco for the CIA or in Afghanistan or in Iraq or in Egypt, and then we were tortured into admitting to a crime that we did not commit. What kind of a law you want? What I want to say here is due process should apply to everybody, whether an American or non-American, whether for somebody on the battlefield or in the poppy fields even of Afghanistan. I'm not defending anybody here, but I'm saying...
Let me ask David
nobody
to
should be tortured, but I mean, to me, let's distinguish between two sets of issues. One is how people are treated in detention versus what is the process for getting them released. One thing, good news for a lot of your viewers should be this. The Obama administration did implement changes, whether some people agree with it or not. The enhanced interrogation techniques are off the table. The military, for years now, is following the Army Field Manual that has absolutely no coercion, frankly, is more protective than many police stations in this country. The CIA now is not implementing and has not been implementing for years enhanced interrogation techniques. So I'm frankly puzzled by this obsessive emphasis on torture. Nobody's being tortured. So how you treat it is one thing. That's all agree that you should be treated humanely and well. The question of whether or not you deserve to be released is a totally different question.
When you say no one's being tortured, is that by your definition? I mean, meaning using...
Not my definition, by the Obama administration's definition. By the definition, remember, the people, most senior people in the Obama administration, the Attorney General, the White House counsel, a number of senior people, all were critics of the Bush administration. So this is a different world. Nobody is being tortured by the most punctilious definition.
Well, but then in terms of the abuses that come out, in terms of the information that we're getting out of places like Guantanamo, Bagram, Abu Ghraib, as it happened, what would be the explanation for
Well, first of all, a lot of it is information is quite old. I'm not saying that all of it is untrue. There were some abuses, but a lot of it is untrue. But second of all, I would ask Andy. Andy, you're familiar about the changes that have taken place. Is anybody being mistreated, even under your definition, in Bagram today, under the new procedures, under the Army Field Manual, under the CIA following the Army Field Manual? Who is being mistreated here and now?
Let me get Andy to respond.
I don't know. I don't know, actually. I mean, it's certainly all the indications, as you say, and as I agree with you, are that towards the end of the Bush administration, and certainly under the Obama administration, new rules have been put in place to implement the humane treatment of prisoners.
So it's not about that anymore.
Bagram is that.
Right. Well, Andy, the quick question is, we've got about a minute. I'll let you finish, but also, can you add an answer to this? It's from our live station chat room, where Andy in New York has asked, when Gitmo is closed, what will happen to the prisoners?
To answer that one very quickly, well, hopefully the majority of those men will be returned home or will have third countries found for them because they weren't involved in terrorism. The few dozen people who were, I hope they get federal court trials. My final word about Bagram would be to say that I have no problem with people being held until the end of hostilities under the terms of the Geneva Conventions if they're soldiers. I think that anybody who is suspected of involvement with terrorism needs to be transferred into a recognizable court system. And there are only those two types of people. And I worry that Bagram still remains a place where the words enemy combatant are bandied around as though they exist. They were invented by the Bush administration.
Right.
That's a fundamental disagreement. Lots of people participate in irregular warfare. They're not honorable soldiers, but they're certainly combatants. They're not just criminals. They're criminals, but they're more than that.
Right. Well, David, I want to thank you very much, and Andy, thank you as well. I know it's a lot to talk about, and we only have this much time, so thank you for your input there.
Good to be with you.
And that's all we have time for today. Thanks for being with us. Remember, you can follow our program on Twitter and send us your questions and comments to use on the show.